one thing that I left with was the membership and this United Conservative Party supports the values that I hold dear in the form of policy and governance resolution. I find there is a very serious disconnect between the membership and the membership pushed bear pit policy and governance resolution and the leadership style that this party currently have in the form of the UCP government.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Critical Compass. Thanks for tuning in today. We have Marco Van Huigenbos, who has graciously decided to spend a little bit of time with us. We don't really have a plan for the topics we're going to discuss today. We're going to let it kind of flow how it will. Marco, for our subscribers, if some are unaware of you and what you represent and a little bit of your history, why don't you take the floor and give yourself a little introduction?
Yeah, well, I want to start off, thanking you guys for having me on. It's been a long time in the making, and it's always great to do a first time. Who knows if we'll see if there's a second, but I always enjoy coming on with new thoughts and great discussions. But for those who don't know me, I mean, I'd almost like to keep it that way because it seems to be that the small world. But I grew up in southern Alberta, just outside of town of Fort Macleod, and the last 10 years have been pretty active for me. I was a Fort Macleod town councillor, so I spent almost 7 years in municipal politics. Got involved in provincial politics right after the NDP formed government in 2015. The concerns that were quite prominent in the conservative world is something I shared, and that got me engaged. Stayed engaged into the early 2020 and the COVID years, and got very involved as much as one could. And I say this catalyst, but like a pre-protest, pre-freedom convoy, pre-border blockades. That's where things changed for me in the last 3 years. I played a prominent role in the Coutts border blockade, and that has landed me in significant legal battles. Recently, earlier this year, been convicted of a fairly serious charge and face sentencing. So that's one aspect of my life the last few years, and a very intertwined aspect is my political advocacy involvement engagement. That stems from being involved in Danielle Smith's leadership team in the South, with definitely a focus in the South, to a very in-depth involvement in Take Back Alberta, its rise and its current standing, and just involved in the UCP in different parts of the province and different levels, with a focus on keeping government accountable to the people they represent. So that's to some degree my bio in the last few years.
Right on. That's the opening paragraph of your Wikipedia.
Yeah.
You mentioned the UCP AGM just happened a little over a month ago. What were I don't know if you watched the episode, but our last interview we interviewed Martyupnorth, Marty Belanger. I know you guys have points of agreement, points of disagreement. What we got his thoughts on the AGM. What, if you wanted to give a little 30,000 foot overview of what you thought of the AGM this year.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that you say we have our points of agreement and disagreement. We've been on shows together. We know each other quite well. I actually seen him Saturday, and this is what he ended up saying because we were having a discussion about something that could have been contentious. And he says, Marco, there's times where we're supposed to disagree, and we always vehemently agree. So I haven't necessarily found anything that I disagree on, or we haven't found anything that we disagree on. I mean, we are, um, depending on the issue. I mean, we haven't touched base on anything, but we share a very similar thought process when it comes to government, the role of government, and the current governments that we have. So back to the AGM. Having been to numerous AGMs, this was still definitely one set aside, from set apart from the others for a number of reasons. It's in Red Deer, which was something that everybody was like, okay, how's this going to go? And I think they did a phenomenal job considering the amount of people. So I'm not one to withhold credit where credit is due. So I applaud the team that put that together for allowing and making sure the AGM went off without a hitch, without a problem. But putting almost 6,000 people in a room, and I guess we should back up, 6,100 and I think 19 registrations, but I believe there was almost 1,000 that never showed up, and I could be wrong on that, but I haven't seen the final report yet. But over 5,000 people in a room or in two rooms. That's a tremendous amount of people there for a similar subject, that being provincial politics, and particularly conservative provincial politics. I think the breakdown. I think there was some frustration with scheduling at certain points, but even that all cleared itself out. There was some controversial debate. That's to be expected. We're not going to agree. We shouldn't always agree. If we all agree, that's a serious problem. But one thing that I left with, besides the networking, the discussions, the interactions, the social aspect of it, there's a nightlife element, you name it. There's a lot of that, right? One thing that I left with was the membership and this United Conservative Party supports the values that I hold dear in the form of policy and governance resolution. I find there is a very serious disconnect between the membership and the membership pushed bear pit policy and governance resolution and the leadership style that this party currently have in the form of the UCP government. We almost unanimously, 90% support for fairly controversial, if we're talking mainstream, policies and resolutions in today's day and age. And I should say mainstream would deem them controversial. I think that more than 50% of Albertans would agree with the approach that the party is taking and that this government, that the membership of this party is taking, not the government necessarily, but that the membership of this party is taking, but it's failing to transition and translate into actual government, into bills or legislation making its way to the floor of the legislature. We see a leader that is following few of the principles, the founding principles of the party, which you can find on the UCP website. We see a style of government that contradicts the founding principles of the UCP party, that contradicts the membership, the desire of the membership. But then we have a very special aspect of this AGM, which was the leadership review, and people who voted in favor of policies and resolution in great in a phenomenal majority on most everything. to then give a even bigger majority to the representative of a government that has, in my mind, failed not on everything, but that has failed significantly to implement said policy driven governance, or sorry, said policy and governance driven by the membership, or follow the principles, the founding principles of the party. So confused to some degree, not confused as to what's happening, because I understand why people did what they did, but one part of me felt like this is great. This is I'm with my people. These are my people. I'm not mine. I mean, I'm one of them. We're all part of this. Not one. We all have a vote. We're all members. But to then see that 91.5% confused me. It was like, where are we? How are we giving the leader of this party, the premier of this province, such an approval when there's such a disconnect between what we want and what they're doing? So that's a bigger discussion, and that was my thoughts that evening, the next day, into the next week. I've now come to a bit more of an understanding as to what people were looking to achieve with that, and the fact that it is a no or a yes. There's no, it's not. It's a very hard.
There's no nuance there, really.
There's no nuance there, and there's no third option as to a more in-depth evaluation of said leadership. So it was very confusing for a lot of people, and I think I even had this conversation with Marty. I can't remember where, but he shared those thoughts. It was just like, this is my people, and then they do this, but it doesn't translate. So those are just some thoughts I had as to that weekend.
So I'm wondering, what would that 91% look like if you had maybe on 5 different dimensions, you had like a floating point scale or a Likert scale of like, if you're actually doing a leadership review, and you're like, well, on policy, do you agree, strongly agree versus disagree? And then you go through like, well, on implementation, on these multiple, if you're treating it more than just a yes or no, I think we would find out a little bit more than this. I think the yes and no almost speaks to, I wonder how many people just said yes because they're like, well, what's the other option right now? Who else would replace her? Would we get any better with the existing bureaucracy? There's all these kind of floating questions of like, the no is kind of a tricky place to be in when the unknown is well, you don't know what else can or would happen given this current framework.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think the two are actually tied together. I think that the one, in some sense, was before the other, even though they're, before we had our board elections and the results of the leadership review announced, the bear pit was concluded. So we have a membership who is attempting to send a very clear message with the policy and how they support it, and the absolute almost unanimous support for some of this, to then end it with a resounding yes as a method of, Premier, this is what we want you to do. I mean, a no, like you just mentioned, a no is, there has to be a plan as to if a no is successful, and there was no plan. But it's still, I think there was a significant percentage of people who abstained, who just didn't vote. They couldn't, one way or the other. But I think the yes was a message in and of itself to, Premier, please, continue to govern, or please govern according to the message that the membership is bringing forward in numbers that are history making, right? Like the attendance levels are, well, they made history, and maybe next year they'll make history again. I mean, people are there's a hope and a desire that their involvement and their engagement, and they're stepping away from the apathetic nature of the past, which, I mean, I think COVID just woke people up. What government did to the population, it got people involved. I wish there was 30,000 people. I mean, it's impossible to maybe it's not impossible, but I think there should be more involvement and engagement. But the people that have gotten engaged are there with hope to implement change and to send a message. And I believe even the message of support was in people's minds a clear mandate, a mandate that they hadn't received in the past. You know, the fifth ballot leadership win, that's not a mandate, right? We barely squeaked it out. The election itself last year wasn't. I mean, I don't think it was as strong of a mandate as some like to say it was. I think it was the NDP's to lose, and they did that. Or sorry, it was theirs to win, but they lost it. Right? They brought forward this small business tax increase, which I think lost Calgary. They would have won if it wasn't for that stupid announcement. I'm thankful that they lost, but I think it was theirs to win, and they lost it. So to say that we won, I find that a bit rich. I think we benefited off of a serious error that Team NDP had made during the pre-writ and the writ, but that win didn't translate to a very strong message of support from Albertans. So I think people came out to let Premier Smith know we like certain things of what you're doing. Please accelerate them. Please double down on them. Please do what we're asking you to do. Please deliver on the campaign promises you've made in your leadership, in the general, tax break, you name it. There's all these different promises that this premier has made. So that's the way I interpret this yes, because it completely conflicts with the policy and governance that the membership has pushed forward, and that largely gets ignored over the course of a legislative sitting.
So that you touched on it a little bit in your answer there. We asked Marty this as well. If you had to make a prediction, given the outward strength of what a 91.5% approval rating represents, would you predict that that Danielle Smith and her team would see that and interpret that as a message of keep doing what you're doing, maybe kind of float around the middle, try to not, piss too many people off? Or do you believe that she'll interpret that as sort of like what you were saying at the end, as kind of the go ahead to, get a little bit more on track with kind of the tone of the rhetoric, at least going into last election, was, which maybe is a little stronger, came off a little stronger anyway than she has seemingly governed so far?
Well, I think we can already see that in the last 5 weeks as to how they concluded their legislative sitting and the steps they've taken, in particular, the Bill of Rights. It speaks to a mindset that we've survived this obstacle as a leadership, as a government, as a head of government, as a premier's office. The next accountability session is to be had with all Albertans. And that is a time when Conservatives have to put aside their grievances and support, the UCP, because the alternative is the NDP, based on, the general mindset. It's not a party affair anymore. It's now the general election, and of course we don't support the NDP. So regardless of who my candidate is, who my MLA is, it's like, you're going to hold your nose and vote, right? Because that's just what we do. So I see this as a huge obstacle that they overcame with flying colors. What I suspect and what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, this is not all necessarily public, but is a premier's office that is going to put it into second gear or third gear in relation to the the style of government, the governance they had, the type of governance they had entertained for the last 2 years. I see very little of what membership has to say being taken seriously. Like, I mean, they're going to take it serious. They're not going to disrespect the membership. They're going to say all the right things. They're going to encourage people to become engaged, to remain engaged. But when it actually comes down to the nuts and bolts of a particular bill that gets tabled, first reading, second reading, committee, and then third reading to Royals, and it doesn't equate to what they're saying. For example, I've seen some of Mickey Amory's statements, and it's like, well, this is great. Like some of his public statements, this is some of his interviews with media. This looks good. We're property rights, gun rights, all of this stuff. But when you actually look at the legislation and you have the ability to interpret the bill and the changes, it's just disgusting. It's not in any way something that benefits us. If anything, it has the opportunity to solidify a repeat in a different scenario of what we've gone through in the last couple of years, without government actually behaving in an illegal manner. They now have, they have the ability to. Well, we've seen that already. We've seen that in another instance here. We had Preston Manning's report. One of the recommendations was that, well, there was 90 recommendations actually, but one of the only recommendations that they implemented was to take the authority away from the chief medical officer of health and give it to cabinet. Now, Jason, because that's where the Ingram decision stems from, right? The Ingram decision and the ruling that deemed Jason Kenney's health measures and emergency measures illegal is because the ultimate authority and the final say was actually up to Dina Hinshaw, our chief medical officer of health. So we had the political class making the decisions. Now, one of the first things they did, and one of the only things that they did, stemming out of Preston Manning's report, was to give that power to the politicians. Now, I'm not saying that I'm opposed to that. That's not what I'm saying, but I only see government making the changes to solidify their position, and if anything, give them the legal means to, that if they ever run into a situation that is similar to something we just went through, they now have every right and the full jurisdiction to, put health mandates, put emergency measures in place, even though the promise is we'll never lock down again or we'll never have a vaccine mandate. Those promises mean nothing to me. That's the promises of a particular politician, and this is not me beating on Danielle Smith. We've seen this through the ages, that what a politician says means very little. It just, every week, every month, every year, promises get broken in politics, provincially, municipally, federally. To me, what matters is the strength of the courts and what mandates the courts, the strength of, for example, a Bill of Rights, the strength of our laws. That's something that, regardless of what a politician says, that keeps them accountable, that holds them accountable. Because Jason Kenney also said we're not going to have a vaccine mandate, and he said that knowing he was lying, because there was no way they could roll out the RFP program. No, not the RFP program. What's it called? The REP. I can't remember what it was called. Our provincial vaccine mandate that we had here. It had an acronym. But 2 months later, he announced that we were rolling it out. Well, it would have been in the works. So while he's at the Calgary Stampede, best summer ever, open for summer, open for good, saying we're never going to have a vaccine mandate, he knew that there was people working on a program that Alberta was going to implement via emergency management COVID committee, right? So I guess people want to put faith in politicians. People want to put their hope in politicians, their trust in politicians. But I would advise people not to do that. I would sooner utilize them to put forward legislation, to put it in, not stone necessarily, but on paper, that these are our rights, and government doesn't have the ability to give them to us or to take them away. Right? That's been the interesting part of this whole thing, is that government's telling us what our rights are. Is like that part was just, it wasn't lost on me. Government is telling us what our rights are, and now we're going to be surprised when government tells us that they're going to take those rights away. Like, who is government, and what role do they play to tell us what our rights are? We have these rights, right? And government has been, consistently infringing on said rights: family, privacy. Um, there's hundreds of categories of rights that people have had through the ages that are now in question or taken away, or we see federally, right? Just the gun right. Okay, we have a right to, well, we don't. It's not a right, but there are rules that people have to follow, and then they have the right to own guns. But which guns is now a big question, right? 324 guns or models have been taken off the market. I mean, it's just,
Well, they're assault style though, so they're scary.
They're 22 caliber guns, right? I know they're assault style, so I feel a little better that Bill Blair thinks the Ukrainians are gonna have the ability to defend themselves. The only thing they're going to be defending themselves is a rodent infestation. That's essentially it. Like, it's just ridiculous, right? But because they look scary, it's a threat. It's just.
Does that count as a reasonable limitation when these things get interpreted? That's the big question, is like, when we have these bills, when this legislation goes in, is it robust enough to survive a change of government? Or if the courts have a certain bias, is it robust enough to still do what it's legislated to do, even with bias in the courts? And
bias in the courts, or the fact that legislation is a double-edged sword. Always is, always has been, right? Like you said, a changing government. Bill 20, for example, earlier this year. Classic example, as somebody who understands that, who has been in municipal politics. Yes, I understand that municipalities are legislated by the province through the Municipal Government Act. Yes. But what I've seen this legislation used for, and only exclusively been used for, is to kind of rein in the Chestermere Town Council and make sure that there's some of these town councils that are challenging this government or the MGA or the Minister of Municipal Affairs in his office, Rick McIver, to give Edmonton the tools to deal with that. That's not what Bill 20 was about. Bill 20 was about, well, I mean, the reasons they said it was about, it was to give the province the ability to challenge and change, land use bylaws that were against the interests of said municipality, or to recall municipal servants, or all of this stuff. For example, I shared something today I seen from an Edmonton councillor. I mean, you might have seen it on Twitter. He had said something about taking public transit, bad weather, convenience, all of this stuff. So something about shit. I'll read it off, because it's just like 6 months or a year or 2 years ago, this was like the stuff conspiracy theories were made of, or that's what they said. And here we now have representatives of major Canadian cities.
Well, they're adopting a lot of the shared language. If that's a tweet,
these are the talking. It's become their talking points. Yeah. So, Michael Jantz, he's a city councillor. Travel safe today in the snowfall, Edmonton. Try to take transit and reduce congestion. Fewer cars mean less traffic. A 15-minute city would help prevent you from needing to leave your district. Your district? Like, can you believe this shit? this 2 years ago, all three of us would have been like booed off of a stage somewhere because of
Laughed off.
that.
Yeah.
Laughed off a
Well,
stage.
15-minute cities. Yeah. With your new world order, right?
And I'm not one, like, I understand convenience. I understand all of that. But that's not what this is. This is the first step to restricting you to your district. Like, dude, this guy, he's gone a little too far down the Hunger
It
Games.
also raises a question. Well, I think a lot of people forget, what does a municipality, like, what is their key role? What are they supposed to do? And does that involve electric buses and saving the climate? And or like, why is there all this extra ideology attached when you aren't even fulfilling your base level services?
Exactly.
Calgary's water is completely, it's been a mess for many years. It's not new. It's not a surprise. Yet they've had this leaking pipe and they're like, oh, it finally got to be a problem. They had to it finally got to a point where it couldn't be ignored, but they were ignoring it while putting all this other money into fluff that doesn't really matter.
You know, like fluff. I mean, there's so much waste. We say, like, Rick Bell likes to write about it, right? Waste at City Hall. And I mean, I don't always agree with Rick Bell, but when it comes to the city of Calgary, I wholeheartedly agree. And that's a problem in a lot of municipalities. That's a problem in my own municipality too. There's no incentive to do better because taxation is real. And you don't pay your taxes, if you don't pay your property taxes after year 2, year 3, they can take you to court and I mean, take away your property. And I mean, there's got to be a consequence. Like, you got to pay your taxes, but it's become criminal in nature as to how governments have been able to tax people and at what levels while failing to deliver the basic level of service, right? And it depends on what part of the city you're in. What there's a lot of factors, but there is significant waste in municipal government, like tremendous amounts of waste, whether it's through the RFP program for projects where they don't necessarily pick the cheapest. I mean, even the method, how they go about awarding these projects. The community sets a budget as to this is what we're looking to spend because the engineers have already submitted a cost analysis for said project. You're going to, I mean, most contractors, no matter how many, they're all going to be within that range. And that range allows for a 13% for the engineers. It allows for a lot of things. So there's no real cost benefit or savings for the community because we're telling contractors where they need to be and what this project, the engineers are saying this is what the project should cost. And now we're just going to find somebody who's going to, you know, who if they're in that ballpark, they get awarded the project. If they pass, you know, certification, qualification, you know, you have to qualify before you can, you know, participate in an RFP or RFP process. But there's no, okay, this is something that should cost $100,000, but the engineers made it $400,000. It's going to cost $375,000, and that'll be the cheapest guy. The next one's going to be $475,000. And there's times where the $475,000 company gets the job for reasons that are never disclosed to the public. But you know what? They get paid for by the taxpayer, by the public purse. So there's no, and that money keeps on rolling in, and they can debenture it, and they can. It's just no business would operate this way. I mean, no business, never, ever.
So you even get cases where, okay, maybe they go with the lowest bidder, but they're just saying the number that they want to hear. And then they're like, okay, well, we'll build this bridge for $100 million. And then it gets delayed, it's over budget, and there's no consequences. So even in the cases like that, there's no accountability that would be there in a private, like normally be there in a private sector. That would, it would have the checks on itself You would have restructuring, or even right now, we're not seeing, both at the municipal level and at the provincial and federal, we're seeing bloat with no mechanism of downsizing, because no department wants to advocate or vote. It's like no department's going to downsize itself. People want to keep their jobs, and they're going to justify a certain amount of work. So if their department gets a certain amount of money, they're going to try to maintain that budget every year. It's not going to go down. And anytime something goes down, the rhetoric's like, well, you're cutting essential this or essential that. And it just adds to the waste.
Well, 100%. It comes down to, this is your budget. Make sure you spend it, because otherwise they're going to cut your budget next year. So just don't turn the trucks off, or don't this or don't that. I wouldn't necessarily even say it's about creating work. It's just about ensuring that you've, you don't want to blow the budget. Then your head could be on the chopping block, right? They'll replace you. That won't reduce a budget, but just, this is the budget. This is what it was last year. This is what it was the year before. Operating budget, right? The capital budget, completely different, right? Those are one-time costs. But on operating budget, unless there's a new deal with the union and everybody's got 3% increase to their wages, okay, that's factored in. Budgets increase 3% or 2% because wages are 75% of the budget. Whatever, you know what I mean. There is never any incentive or reason for them to cut the budget, or to do things cheaper, because, well, it's like their world. And I think the biggest reason why there's no incentive to cut budgets is because people aren't actually working with their own money. And quite often when you do cut, it could end up costing you money when you're in the public service, right? So, or costing you elections or things like that. It's just, I've struggled with this so much as to why aren't we just like axing the public service? Like, why are we not just cutting off the fat? What is the holdback? What are the reasons that Edmonton? Because I mean, there's people there that want to do this. I mean, they go in on a platform of downsizing government, right? So we get rid of 12 top managers at AHS. That's not cutting government. That's just that was driven by ideology, right? That wasn't like we're cutting it to save dollars. The 12 people behind him jumped into those positions, and I mean, the ideology is the same. I don't see that as some kind of a win. But how many jobs have been cut at AHS? I don't think any jobs have been cut at AHS. And AHS is a classic example in this province for obvious reasons. But if anything, we've created more jobs at AHS. I mean, the budget's increased. They've given them another $1 or $2 billion last year, and before you know it, we're going to be pushing $30 billion a year for AHS, the AHS budget. 30 of an $80 billion budget. I'm sure we'll see that in the next 2 years as well. So it's just, it's frustrating, because at a time where we have an all-time high production levels, I seen Brian Jean just shared something as well, 5% higher than last year as a whole. Super high resource revenue, or resource dollar, or resource prices. And we're still running a cash deficit. We're still running a deficit in this province, right? We should be socking away billions, like almost $10 billion. But no, we have politicians, and I mean all of them, the rurals, the urbans, all of them, because I mean, if you don't speak up, you're complicit. That's the way I look at it, who are part of this government, and they're spending in a manner that makes Rachel Notley look like a saint. Yeah, I said it. Like, it makes Rachel Notley look like a saint. Yeah, sure. We had the oil crashed, and I mean, we were in a serious situation. There was no resource revenue pumping up government or provincial coffers, but we do now. we do now, and we've still spent everything. So there's a lot of problems, but I mean, this is just a big one because it's affecting every aspect of this province at this point. I mean, it feels like this province is booming, but I like to say that government's booming. I think, Danielle Smith has increased the size of the public service by 11.2% since Jason Kenney. Jason Kenney reduced it 7.6. He came in after Rachel Notley, and we knew that we had to reduce the size of the public service because she had increased it like 20-some%. But here we have the next premier, a conservative, libertarian premier. I mean, libertarian is lesser government as its founding principle, or to some degree its basis. And she increases the public service by 11.2%. I mean, these aren't just numbers I think are cool, or I'm just like, I'll stick with that one. No, these are real numbers. You can do the research. You can figure this out. So that's, anyways, like I said, we're bouncing all over the place here, but those are concerns. Those are real issues that conservatives should be concerned with. And we shouldn't allow our premier or our government to be able to just get away with that, because how does this benefit us, right? We're supposed to be the fiscal ones. We're supposed to be the ones that reduce government. We're supposed to be the ones that cut services, not critical services, but that cut into excess, waste, bloat. So,
well, it comes back to what I think that comes back to kind of what you said earlier when we were talking about the Bill of Rights. I mean, it's going to involve putting some language down and taking some decisions that are going to ensure that you're just not going to get elected again. It's going to require making decisions like a politician going into diving into an issue knowing that this is going to cost me my job, but this is for the greater good in the long run. If you've got, AHS is a great example. I mean, they have an extremely powerful union. And if you go in there and if you're Danielle Smith and you have a certain, message about, well, this is the amount of jobs we're going to cut. Well, it's amazing where that funding from AHS and that union messaging is going to go into ensuring that you're not allowed to carry out that threat, right? So you've got a problem where the right decision to take might be the one that guarantees that you're not allowed to take any more decisions.
Sure. Okay. Well, but that's the scenario. That's what I feel Edmonton is most worried about when it comes to big decisions, contentious issues. That if we proceed with this, it could cost us in the polls, and it could cost us on election day, and we now lose government. Well, there's a few different things that I would counter them with. There's the morality of the issue. There's what's the right thing to do regardless. It's not always the popular approach. The right thing to do can be put against the greater good, and some people have different arguments. Well, the greater good is definitely not to lose government. Well, if it's issue based, then we have to stick to the issue, and we can't always look down the road and say, well, we're going to lose a general election in 3 years. No, this is the issue today. But have we ever actually ran the whole scenario? Have we ever said we're going to downsize AHS, we're going to reduce the public service as a whole, we're going to cut the budget, we're going to cut spending, which translates to, the rallying cry of the left, which is jobs, 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 public jobs. Okay, have we ever done that? And has it ever translated to the loss of government or the loss of support? I would say no and no, because for one, we've never done that. So we don't know if it actually translates to the loss of government. We've never actually cut AHS, we'll cut their budget, cut 10% of the workforce. I mean, the middle managers. I'm not saying firing doctors and nurses. Like, nobody needs to put words in my mouth there. Middle managers. It's a problem. We know it's a problem. Who's got the kahunas to do something about it? Plus, let's just back up a step. Who do these people vote for? Now, I'm not one to say, well, you don't vote for me, your job's going to get cut. No, but if you want to use that argument that it's going to cost us in the election, you're talking about people that don't support us.
Yeah, they were never going to vote for
And
you anyway.
They were never going to vote for you anyways. And this goes back to a bigger concern. It feels like our conservative governments, I don't want to leave this just to Danielle Smith, but this government, the past government, previous PC governments, especially in the last decade or two in the age of media and such, and the NDP. I mean, the NDP is not more than 10, 15. Well, I mean, Rachel Notley spent 17 years in service as an MLA. So 15 to 10 years. So back to what I was saying. We're worried about what the opposition says, what the support of the opposition is going to say, and what a opposition supporting mainstream media is going to say. We're worried about that while we're failing to worry about the wrath that we are possibly going to incur from our membership, from our own base, and from the people that support us. So
you can't make both of them happy simultaneously. No, that won't happen.
But both don't vote for you either. It's a very simple approach. Now, some issues are not clear cut, and there used to be a significant soft middle, mushy middle, in the form of the Alberta Party, but North American politics has eliminated the mushy middle. I can promise you that. We can see that everywhere in the States, down south, up north. There is no more middle ground. I mean, I think we're even going to see the elimination or the consolidation of the NDP and the Liberals in the next 4 years. And I could see it happening because, I mean, they're both going to get completely annihilated. And I think for them to have any chance of restructuring, they'll have to. And I mean, I don't know what separates the two other than color at this point. Their ideology is the same. So we're going to see the complete elimination of this middle neutral political standpoint where, I might be a social liberal and a fiscal conservative, which equates what, progressive conservative, or I don't know what the term for the right of the left is. It doesn't exist. The issues are too divisive. Partisanship or non-partisanship is completely out the door, which is unfortunate. I mean, I'm not necessarily okay with some of this. I think there's the ability for political parties, for MLAs, for people to work together on issues that benefit all Albertans, to work across the aisle. To me, that's a loss as a whole. That's not something we should celebrate. But this is the reality we're facing. We have the left, we have the right. Terms I don't necessarily like to use, but there is a abyss. There is a huge divide, and there's very few people that stand in there in the middle and say, "Oh, well, I kind of like the NDP sometimes." And no, you don't. We're so far apart. We've moved so far from, like, I think the center has moved so far, and conservatives, some of them may have just stayed put, and the left has moved even further. Like, it's unfortunate, but I mean, this attempt to cater to people who actually, frankly speaking, hate your effing guts is the most. It's not a political position anymore. To me, it either means you're not saying who you really are, or you're attempting to move to the center. But to think that there are people who, like, that there's some sort of a swing vote in this province, I don't know. I just don't believe it. Sure, there's a couple thousand, of course there is, but I don't believe there's this 15% that is this significant swing vote. I just don't believe it.
Yeah.
So, anyways.
Yeah, it's certainly hard to argue that North American politics hasn't seen a swift exit from the center to the polls. Do you have a theory on, like, there's a, I don't know if you're familiar with this theory have you heard of the term horseshoe theory before? With respect to politics? So there's a theory that rather than viewing politics on a left-right spectrum, you can view it more as a horseshoe shape.
Oh, that way. Yeah. Oh, 100%.
The furthest left and the furthest right tend to resemble each other, and then there's the bulk of people.
They're not 100% I have. I mean, I'm a big believer in that. I just have never heard it called horseshoe. I've always just interpreted it as the far left and the far right. They're not as far apart as you think they are.
Is that
That's fair,
more
unfair.
on the authoritarian aspect of it? So if you're trying to map that out on the quadrant, you'd be going up in the vertical axis towards the authoritarian and away from the libertarian. The other thing I've kind of wondered, or I've kind of noticed, is there's almost two battles happening right now. There's on the conservative side, we have dissent and vocal voices trying to help rein us in and try to like get some accountability for the principles that, well, obviously we want a little bit less government. We want responsible governance and spending, and we don't want to be increasing debt. We don't want to be in that kind of a fiscal situation. But there's also the wokeness aspect, which is prevalent on the left, because I do have a lot of friends and family that would be, I don't think they fully understand the degree of the identity politics, but they go along with it because the left has asserted the moral position, has called everybody bad, and almost like as conservatives, they're in a defensive position and they don't have the guts to really be able to like fully articulate what they get wrong in some of these arguments. And you gotta reject the game that they're playing, because somebody will be like, well, you're a racist. I'm like, well, that's a baseless, you can't even go down that road. You got to reject their game and then stick to the principles and poke holes in the underlying framework. But that takes a little bit of balls, and we have hints of that in some politicians. But the appeasement's a losing game, because the left will just assert again the moral ground and then beat you at their own game.
And it's like exactly what you said earlier. Your apology never meant anything to them in the first place. They were never going to change their opinion on you, right? So yeah, there does seem to be a dearth of politicians willing to accept the heat of just unabashedly coming out and saying, "Listen, this is what I believe in, and it's fine if you don't like it. I'm not going to be intimidated by you calling me names."
Well, 100%. And you know what the biggest key detail is to the key ingredient to identity politics? It's your own identity. It's your ability to stand there, to take the beating, and I mean, for one person, it means absolutely nothing. And for the next, it's a real life crisis, right? I'm making headlines. The press is beating up on me. The opposition is beating up me. Some people laugh it off, like, what did you expect? Like, I mean, you get used to it. As somebody who's made a headline or two, it just doesn't. It's, for some, I can get it. Like, I probably have brothers or family members or people I know that they wouldn't sleep all week if their name appeared in the paper. And lately it's been fairly quiet, but not a month goes by, there's not something, and it's just like, oh, cool. Oh, somebody sends you something, like, oh, great, I said something. I mean, I tweeted something. It's just, for some, character matters, and that's, for some, it's just not who they are, and that's why they're in the position they're in, or not. But to ignore the issue is, to me, that's unacceptable. It's not even possible anymore, right? If this is how you identify, and I'm not talking about how you identify in relation to the identity politics of today's day and age. No, what you believe in, what your moral standing is, then profess that. I mean, you're going to take some heat or not, but if you stand firmly in your shoes and remain respectful, take that approach that this is what you believe in. That's my right to believe such in relation to the laws of the land that are still there. I've been elected to represent said party, said people, in relation to who I am and what I believe in and the morals that I have. And I make no apology. I mean, you can, like, that's it. That's all. It's not up for discussion. If I upset you, I'm sorry. This is who I am. Take it. Or not. I mean, it's just the people that try to work around it, like sometimes you see it in the media, sometimes there's, pressers where staffers have put together mumble jumble of wording, and I know sometimes the people that have the ministers and such, they're like, well, this is put there for me, but it's like, well, no, then write your own speeches, then write your own statements, then write your own tweets. But to go along with what is very clearly a left leaning, driven by the left, and in its roots a anti-society, I'm trying to think of the word here, anti-humanity, because I mean the basis of humanity, the basis of our society is founded on the fact that we got men and women, and it takes the two of them to what's the word here, to to create offspring, like to to build a family, etc. How can we entertain? I understand there's scenarios, there's things like that, there's sensitive subjects, there's sensitive situations, but to build legislation to create a basis or a standard around what is a 0.00 some percent of the population, that doesn't make any sense. Yes, we have to be respectful, we have to take care of I don't want to use any improper language, but I don't have all the proper terminology, but there are unique situations, and I'm aware of that. But to take those and to shove that down the throat of the rest of society in a manner that confuses the next generation, and now we're really talking identity politics. But that's just that's wrong, for one. And when conservatives apologize for that, ignore it, or try to tippy toe around it, it disgusts me, because it's a I think it's an agenda. It's an evil agenda, driven by it's driven by those who look to divide and conquer, to those who benefit off of the destruction of either the family unit or society as a whole. Like I see that there's no good in it, and there's no good in entertaining it or acknowledging it, and that's unfortunate. I think there's been some positive legislation that have made its way through the legislature this year, which is a first step. Like, let's be very clear, it's not as far as any of us would like it to go, but it's acknowledging that there was a problem. But what we need to acknowledge as well is that for every little step we take, they're going to take 10. And we need to start moving at the speed, or countering them at the speed that the left is moving. And this is not specifically the NDP. This is just what's happening in North America, around the world. Like, it's a rot. It's seriously a rot in politics, and I think it needs to be addressed and stamped out. And I hope over time it will. It's kind of like cancel culture. I think we've kind of seen the tail end of cancel culture. People are starting to be able to be who they are, say who they are, without being completely canceled, and effectively canceled, right? I mean, for the stupidest shit. So is this a trend? Let's hope it's a trend. Let's hope it's a trend that's on the tail end. And I mean, there's been a lot of hurt and harm done, like too much. But let's hope that the full cost is becoming, public. At least I hope it is, anyways.
I think one of the terms you were looking for when you were describing this was it definitely is anti-human.
Anti-human,
but it's
100%.
Yeah, but it's we bring him up all the time on the channel. But one of our favorite thinkers is a guy named Peter Boghossian, and I think it was him who developed this term called substitution hypothesis, and so his definition of it is that as societies have become, Western societies have become less and less religious over recent decades, they've substituted the place that religion normally carries in their lives with other things, and then they start to behave in religious ways or in cult-like ways about those ideas. And that is, I think, what you see with a lot of the gender ideology now, is that it feels like, to me, the way that people describe gender ideology is, if you just replace some words and you use the word like Holy Spirit or soul or things like that, like, it's all it really is religious language, sort of in the guise of a social movement, and cult-like behavior like that is very difficult to counter, because the people who believe that it's a part of them, and it's not just a temporary belief. It's not just like a preference of beer over wine or something like that. It's something that's integral to somebody's own identity.
100%, 100%. And I think a classic example on a different level is to some degree, if you're Christian or of a religious background that believes in creation, then you step away from that. You gotta fill that vacuum. Well, what have we done, right? We've created this ever changing ideology and thought of evolution. I guess that's the word in and of itself. And I'm not going to go into too much there, but it's a vacuum. It's a vacuum that they've had to fill, and they've filled it with, currently, gender ideology. And I'm sure there's other things out there that are more of a minority in respect to the people that support that or promote that in whatever part of the world. But in the Western Hemisphere, this gender ideology has become a religion. It's been fanatical, like, it's crazy, and thankfully it's being addressed because of the severe consequences of those who've been harmed the worst by it, and them speaking out.
So the gender ideology is being addressed, but it does reflect a greater shift away from like communities, families, and religions seem to be the most resistant to top-down kind of political influence. So if you fractionate people, and obviously, like, if you look at this libertarian principle of, like, we've got to protect the individual, the institution of the individual, is we've got to protect that. But at the same time, we can't throw out some of these core pillars of what society, like what we've developed society with. And we've had strong family units, strong community units, and the community through religion as well. And if you look at early Canada, early United States, the role of the government at the federal level was a little bit more hands-off on people's day-to-day activities. And you'd have a shared purpose that people would volunteer effort for a common goal to improve their communities, to improve their religious circle or their extended family. And right now, we're not seeing the same drive because we've eroded these institutions. And I feel like as you erode that down, and unless we do something to either rebuild some of these communities, which we're seeing a little bit of right now, but unless we really get the communities and families strengthened, what's replacing it is top-down government control and ideologies weaponized through governments and there can be whatever selfish means, but people are more easily controlled when these structures are not there.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah.
Marco, let's zoom out for a second. I'm curious. Before you were maybe let's say infamous because of the
That's correct.
Coutts events. you had you were involved in municipal politics long before that. What was the initial driver? I believe you got into politics very young. What was sort of the driver for you to get involved in politics in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like a question I've definitely addressed a few times, and I'll finish it off with what I actually ran into when I entered politics versus what I thought I was entering, or I thought I was getting myself into. Um, I was a contributing part of my community. I got in; it interested me. There had been some fairly divisive figures in our local council, and being, a bit, how would you say that? I mean, I was always looking for a little bit of adventure, um, not one to sit still, but and a bit impulsive as well. I thought, hey, this is something that might interest me, so let's do it. And before you know it, you've talked to some people, you've got some support, and you're off to the races. You run this campaign, and I mean, I was successful. I think I ran against, 14 other people, so 6 councillors. So I mean, I was top 5 of 14. So, but it was a positive thing, right? People are always looking for the a younger generation enter politics. It almost seems like it's the 60-year-olds that are your contributors, and they are. But it's should be something that my generation is more concerned with, but I get why they're not, especially in today's day and age, right? With the struggle to just make ends meet, there's very little time for anything else. But I still think that's a bit of an excuse. But I entered politics, and one of the reasons why I decided to do that was I just wanted to contribute back to the community, or contribute to the community. Um, you know, Services, basic level of services, right? That's what communities provide for their citizens. Make sure the streets are paved, lights are on, all of that stuff, right? Let's town was growing at a decent rate. There'd been some decent investment. I had just started my company. I thought, this is how I can contribute, and that's what I did. That's what happened. What I ended up getting involved in, though, and this is not exclusive to Fort Macleod. This is at that time that was a trend that was making its way through municipal government, period, across the country, was these federal level social issues, and how they made their way to the local levels. Things from crosswalks to pride flags to every little artsy fartsy social, or social program, and how it was a responsibility, or how there was a desire for municipalities to get involved and to have a position and to have a say. So what I thought municipal government was and what it actually turned out to be are two completely different things. But that being said, I enjoyed it. I mean, there was moments. There was definitely times of crisis versus a year or so of this is just a great year. We had nothing controversial. Nobody lit a flagpole on fire or something like that. Not that never happened in our town, but it happened in a neighboring town. It's like, for a town council, regardless of your position on that, it's tough because it brings attention to an issue that is festering in society, and that you ultimately don't have the ability to do anything about, other than to issue some public statement, right? So it I learned a lot, and if anything, it was a step for me to get involved in provincial politics. And when I say get involved, I've never been involved on an elected level in provincial politics. Never been a goal. It's never been something that has even presented itself. My mind is more of a behind the scenes on an advocacy side of things, and effective advocacy. I mean, I have the ability to pull some levers, for better or for worse, depends who you ask. But I I had some very positive years in the town of Fort Macleod on municipal council, and I resigned earlier this year in February because I didn't want to drag myself through the courts. You've all seen the Fort Macleod town or Coutts blockade organizer, Fort Macleod town councillor, right? Like it was just always Fort Macleod. It was, and I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to drag them through the courts because that's what you're kind of doing that, right? And I know people still know me as such. People, if they write, the media connections I have, be it CBC to Don Braid or whoever, they're previous Fort Macleod, like they still associate the town to you, right? So, but back to the question. I mean, just a genuine desire to get involved in politics, and I mean, looking back now, I'd like to say bring a certain level of common sense. I mean, sure, I did that very effectively, to the point where there are those in the community, many in the community, even those who don't necessarily agree with all of my views, who just felt that I was a very grounded voice in council chambers on issues. I was there for the community. I wasn't there for me. I wasn't there for my business. And I always brought that common sense approach that is so lacking in politics these days. And yeah, I just I can thank my upbringing for that, right? Resourceful, think outside the box approach, but like, let's not try to reinvent the wheel, guys, or why are we doing it this way? I don't give a shit if the MGA says this is the best way to do something. That may be as an umbrella approach to things, but what works in Valley View or some other, West Lock, that might not work in Fort Macleod, right? This is a big country. This is a big country, and it's diverse, and it's uh, there's a lot of different issues and problems that different municipalities face that you can't take a blanket approach to. So I was always I thought about things, right, and if I had an opinion, you're bound to hear it, and I respected the democratic process, and the voice that I had there. But yeah, so that's a bit of those 6-7 years. I'll never forget them, and who knows, maybe there's a stint on municipal politics in my future. It's not something I would say no to. I understand it, I enjoy it, and what I did learn is that we always look to, you get the prime minister or the premier. We always look to these figures who are at the top, who we think they influence our lives, they affect our community, or they're in control. No, it's your local level. It's your local government that has the most impact in one's life. And that is the biggest misunderstanding in politics. People they want to talk to the boss, they want to talk to the premier, it's like, no, you got to talk to your town council, talk to your councillors. They impact you. What they do impacts you more, you know, more daily than any other level of government, period. Like, I understand foreign affairs, it impacts us, how people view us, but does it really? Like, okay, China or India and Canada are kind of, at loggerheads right now, but does that really impact us? Doesn't impact me daily. Whereas your mill rate or your garbage collection, or whether your street is safe or paved or whatever. I mean, you got kids, or your playground, or your service levels, like those are all the things, or what services are available, or is your council, very restrictive, a lot of red tape. Now you don't have an eye doctor or a chiropractor or all these services that you now need to go to the big city for. Sure, there are some provincial regulated services like hospital, education, things like that, that the town council has no control over, but most everything else, that's in the realm of municipal government, and that impacts us every day. So that's something I found out very quickly, and I've always shared that message, and I think that is starting to hit home as well. If we see the interest in school boards, municipal politics, the upcoming October municipal elections, and all the other elections that happen at the same time. It's going to be an interesting 2025, and I think people are starting to realize that level of government has a significant and maybe even too much of an impact in one's life. So to me, it's that awareness that's important, and the fact that people are starting to see that's very positive.
And James, I'll let you get the last word in here after I ask Marco this. Before we hit record, I told you to. I said hold that thought because you were getting into a really good point about we mentioned the general maybe disconnect in maybe recent months or years between how we feel politics is going in Alberta versus how politics is going in general across the country. And you mentioned that you're not sure if Canada as a whole is salvageable anymore, but you still have a little bit of hope for Alberta. What would your hope for Alberta be, and what if you had to pick the most salient points? Why do you feel the country is maybe gone down a path of no return, but we're not necessarily that far gone in Alberta right now?
Well, so it's more of our role, Alberta's role in the confederation, not necessarily issues based. Debt, all of those things. Those are, if one makes the attempt, you can tackle those issues. The realization that confederation is not fair and has never been fair to the West, and particularly Alberta, is something that, I think there's millions of dollars spent every year to suppress that thought, to suppress any kind of movement on that. I can say in the form of Alberta separation, I'm not an Alberta separatist. I think that it's possible. I definitely feel that the province needs to start taking some serious steps into the domain of more sovereignty on all levels. We want what Quebec has. We don't hate Quebec. We're just jealous. We're jealous of Quebec. That's what this whole Quebec versus Alberta, we hate each other. Bullshit. We just want what they want. Why can't we get what they want? Right? So, and there's ways to do that. And Edmonton doesn't want to do that because the CPC and the UCP, you have these two conservative parties that are not as connected as per se an NDP Liberal or NDP Federal or Provincial, but they're connected. We have MLAs whose dads are MPs. These guys are connected. So any real any serious thought of more sovereignty or more independence from the federal government in the last couple of years has been heavily suppressed by a very imposing and incoming Pierre Poilievre government, based on the polls today. Anything could change. But why I believe that Canada is no longer salvageable, as a country, it's a very real thing. I moved to Canada. I'm an immigrant, but I believe that our current form of, we have a Westminster parliamentary democracy. That's a system we utilize on a federal level, on a provincial level. But unless we open up for key issues such as equalization, unless those issues are addressed, there's going to be an end to this. Alberta is going to see itself at the end of a rope sooner or later. And I'll share this scenario, right? Pierre Poilievre is going to be great when it comes to a international stage. We're not going to be the embarrassment of the day much longer. But Pierre Poilievre isn't going to benefit Alberta because every government in this country needs Quebec and Ontario to form government. They don't need Alberta. Now the CPC has Alberta, and that's how they've always had it. That's not even something that we're not the swing here. The swing vote is the East, right? We know that there's Maritimes is more of a swing vote than Alberta and Saskatchewan are. We vote in blue fence posts in this part of the country. So what I'm saying with that, if we don't have the ability to address these serious grievances that this province and that the West have, and I would say, when I say the West, sure, there's parts of BC. I think Saskatchewan is definitely getting on board with some of these issues, and they have a different way of dealing with them. But Alberta is the we're the front row here. We're the ones that have the most grievances, and we're the ones that have been at the receiving end of this government in the last the attacks that this government has, um, uh, you know, attacked us on. The issues that this government has attacked us on. So there's things that have to be addressed, but I don't see a political avenue or a political will to address these issues. I mean, what needs to happen for us to be able to address equalization, right? We had a referendum here. We had a referendum that was supported by how much percent to what was it again? I'd have to. What was Kenny's referendum on? It was like a fair.
I'll look it up here. You
the
carry
fair
on. I'll
panel
look it
deal,
up.
right? But that's all great. So Alberta and Albertans feel that equalization is unfair and that it should be addressed, or the algorithm should be changed. But what ability do we have to make that happen? On a political side, we don't. We don't have support in Parliament.
62% of Albertans
62%,
voted yes.
right? Yes. So we don't have support in Parliament. We just don't have the support in our own party, and we definitely don't have the support in relation to the seats. On the Senate, it's a whole different side of things. I mean, that's not the avenue for starters, but we don't. The Senate is elected by Ottawa again, right? Or appointed by Ottawa. Our senators, we have, I think, 3 or 4 senators in waiting as we speak, Alberta senators. So people are going to interpret this, we need to separate, or we need to. No, there has to be a complete restructuring of confederation. I mean, we actually have to go back to confederation. We have Ottawa needs to take a step back, and we need to go back to a setting where the provinces had exclusive authority over their jurisdictions, and that Ottawa stayed in their lane. We now have levels of taxation federally that fill the coffers in Ottawa, that then allows Ottawa to dangle a carrot in front of the provincial governments on issues that are exclusively provincial jurisdiction. That has been an issue. COVID exposed that issue more than ever, and it continues to be an issue. So now we have the federal government interfering in health, education, social services, you name it, because they're funding it, but they're using our dollars to fund it. Why? Because they have access to our dollars, because the provinces, exclusive of Quebec, don't tax or don't or allow Ottawa to tax the citizens instead of the province taxing the citizens, right? Ottawa controls the CPP. We need to take back our pension. So policing. There's all these issues that, in my mind, are provincial, and it's provincial jurisdiction, and it's up to the province to dictate if confederation remains a positive, a viable solution to Alberta's prosperity. I don't believe it can be done federally. I do not believe that federal politics is going to make the change in Alberta that Albertans are looking for. It is only up to Edmonton, and it's up to Edmonton to realize the muscle that it wields and to utilize, I guess, different example, to realize it's holding a stick and to use that stick. And that, again, brings me back to some of the frustrations of Danielle Smith, or that I have with Danielle Smith, because she ran on a campaign of wielding that stick. And I feel that the relations between Edmonton and Ottawa, or the incoming the CPC party, and the fact that they don't want to ruffle the feathers of the East is why some of these issues have gone away again, right? So does that explain things a bit more? Some people are like, oh, if confederation, if federal politics is not an option, then separation. No, not necessarily separation, but only Alberta and only Edmonton. When I say Edmonton, I mean the provincial government has the ability to make the changes to confederation, to equalization, to all these issues that benefit Alberta. There is no way that Parliament is going to ever rule in a manner that benefits Alberta first. We will always remain second fiddle in Ottawa. And in Edmonton, we are first. And Edmonton needs to realize, I mean, they realize that, but they need to take a page out of Quebec's
Their playbook.
Their playbook, sorry. They need to take a step out of Quebec's playbook, which brings me back to, we don't hate Quebec. We don't hate Quebecers. We don't hate, I mean, I think it's bullshit that their bilingualism, I think that's an issue maybe to some degree, but it doesn't really affect us. But we're just jealous. We're just jealous that they have the levels of sovereignty and the independence that they have. And every time they threaten something, Ottawa jumps. That's all. That's it. Right? So that's my approach to our current confederation and why. I mean, I vote federally, but I don't think federal politics is going to get us out of this mess that we're in.
Well, it's worth reminding that, like, even for myself up to a point, I thought the hierarchy was federal and then provincial under it, and not realizing, well, provincial's at the same level as federal within their jurisdiction. And
Exactly.
I think this is where kind of the forever optimist Eva Chipiak is. Her focus is just get people engaged. Well, get the level of education and understanding about civic engagement higher if you get more people engaged, and if people have the knowledge of, like, well, this is actually under federal jurisdiction, this is under provincial, and this is how our Constitution was formed, and here are some of the limitations. And, well, to make a change, you need all the premiers to get together, and you need a political will. But to get the political will, you need the groundswell of support and or the voice pushing the premiers to do that. And that only happens with enough conversations, with enough education, with enough civic engagement. And I think if we throw our ball to the court of, like, well, we're just waiting for federal to do something, we're forgetting that, like, the change happens, first of all, like getting your life in order, the best of your ability, and or engaging with your community, with your friends, having these conversations, expanding your circle, getting involved. Let it be a CA association, let it be go to these teachers, like any of the school board meetings. There are places we can affect change. And I think some people feel hopeless, but they haven't tried anything. They haven't actually taken any of the steps. And I think there's a lot that can be done.
Well, it goes back to this top-down approach that politics always takes, right? People are hopeless because they're like, how am I ever going to influence what's happening in Ottawa or Edmonton? Well, no, not like that. But you got your library board. Influence things on a local level. And it's not for everybody to go to the big leagues, if I'm going to say that, right? It's not in everybody. It's not for everybody. Not everybody could do that. But everybody can do something. And that's where I agree with Eva. Eva, right? Like, she actually just gave me her book Saturday night. I was having supper with her and Chris, I believe. Yeah, that's her fiance.
Great people.
We love great. Them. I'm on a board with her. She's great. I haven't read the book yet. I mean, she's like, you're gonna take it with, take it with to the big house. And it's like, yeah, I don't know if they'll let me take that, but I'm gonna try. But her approach is definitely, her knowledge is more federal focused. But before that, it's get involved. And I think that's the key message. Get involved. Because I think the biggest negative, the biggest crisis that we face, issues aside, it's the apathetic nature of Canadians. And that is what, I can we like to blame the government, but the only reason the government has been able to do what they've done to us is because of our apathy, right? So we can't look very far when it comes to blame. I mean, there's issues, and sometimes you can blame that group or this group or those people, they should have done, but we blame ourselves when it comes to this. We've allowed them to get away with what they've done, whatever the issue is, whatever the crisis was, right? I always say critical mass. Like, if people realize the power they had, I mean, we could fix this. We could fix so much in such a short time. If they only knew. And this brings me back to just the struggle that the majority of this population has, the majority of Canadians are having just to survive, and that's unfortunate. And that, government loves it. I mean, certain governments love it more than others, but we are walking toward a welfare state every day. And if there's one thing that a welfare state, or a big part of the identity of a welfare state is ultimate control, right? Government controls everything. Government controls, you go from breakfast programs in the schools to political engagement. It's all controlled from the top down, and that's a scary thought, but it's happening. And especially in this country, it's being challenged in this province, and that's why I think Alberta is that place of hope. Some people like to talk about Alberta and it's doom and gloom, and trust me, there's days where it's doom and gloom here too, but we are still better off than most jurisdictions in on this continent in the Western Hemisphere. Is there a lot of problems that we've narrowed down and that we have an inside scoop to that everybody outside this province doesn't see? They're like, oh, we love Danielle Smith. She's the best. Sure, I understand that. But when it comes to the nuts and bolts, we see the issues, and we still want to refine those details. But it's not right to be that negative that we're on an abyss and we're about to go off a cliff as a province. No, that means that Quebec and Nova Scotia and New Brunswick went off 20 years ago, and they haven't. They're still there, right? There's no, there's financial difficulties and deficits and out of control migration, immigration. Those things, they need to be addressed, but they're not existential crises at this point, like we see in other parts of the world. So that's my positive contribution for the day.
Hey, that's great. That's that's good. And I was gonna say we've been at it for about an hour and a half here. So just to be respectful of your time here, we really appreciate you taking this time. Maybe to kind of close her up here, that was a nice little positive note. But we always like to ask, is there something that you think we should have talked about today that we didn't, or anything that you feel you'd like to just put out there in the ether before we wrap her up?
No, I think we've nothing specific. I think we've talked about a lot. Like, we've bounced around a bit. We've really drilled down into certain topics. It's definitely been political in nature, which, I mean, that's a common interest here. My biggest thing is get engaged. I mean, back to my biggest takeaway from the AGM, it was the networking aspect. And I'm not like some big social butterfly, but I've been around. I mean, I know people, and
we've seen you around.
Yeah, right. Connections matter. I mean, I got a pretty big Rolodex, political Rolodex, for better or for worse. Some of them probably want to lock me up. I know they do, and others they think I'm some kind of hero. It doesn't matter. None of it matters if you're not engaged. It all matters, but if you're not engaged, then you're part of the problem. And being involved is part of the solution. I'm not a UCP cheerleader. I'm a conservative first. I have the principles that I was, the morals that I support, that I stick to, and the principles that I strive to execute in public life. But what that's done, it's aligned me with this party. At this point, I mean, I am a member in good standing of the party. I'm sure there's some that may want to change that, and that's fine. But that goes towards the whole groupthink aspect that I think is a big upcoming issue for even conservatives, right? Critical dissident thought is no longer appreciated. I mean, it's being suppressed even in this party, and that's a problem. So get involved, get engaged, and make sure your voice is heard. And that doesn't mean being the guy at the microphone. That means you show up, you cast your ballot on many of the different, either the nominations, the local level AGMs, some of the committees of policy committees that bring forward these hundreds of resolutions, governance and policy that eventually make their way to the mosh pit, that at times do make it into legislation in this province. That all started. That started in some office somewhere in some small community, at a board level, not for profit board level, volunteer-based board level meeting, where these ideas become something. They work their way up through the vetting process to the PPGC, and then eventually to an AGM, and then possibly, gets tabled in the floor of the legislature someday. That it's like this massive river that has its headwaters. This is where it started, just a little trickle, and that might be you. That might be that person. So when you look at it from the 34,000 view, it can be discouraging at times. How can I make change? But when you actually get involved and you start to understand the process, understand how things work, and you're dedicated to it, you can become a major change or change maker in said avenue or something, said issue that interests you, right? So get involved. I mean, be that person that puts that idea on paper, advocates for it, and turns it into something real.
Wise words. Perfect place to wrap her up, I think. Cool. Well, Thanks so much, Marco. We really appreciate it. We'll put your socials in the description and when we post this out. So thank you again very much for your time. We do really appreciate you coming on and hearing your perspectives, getting to know you a little bit better, and I hope we can do it again.
Yeah, I really appreciate the discussion. It was great. Like I said, once you get into it, it's like time flies by. But thanks for having me on, and let's stay in touch. You bet.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was a good one.
Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good night.
Too.